The Beatles put the bickering aside and get down to business one last time. Make sure to look both ways as we try to cross Abbey Road. Stay with us.
Get ready for the 3324 podcast, where lifelong friends Dean Legiro and Eric Kuber share their love of all things music and movies. Dean has directed short films and is a music trivia buff. And Eric, trained in audio engineering, brings his extensive knowledge of music and film to the conversation as they discuss, debate, and celebrate their favorite albums, films, and much more.
Welcome, friends, to the 3324 podcast. One and all are welcome here, right, Eric?
That's absolutely right. And that was brilliant, by the way. It was one of your better introductions.
That one?
I did. I love that one. That was great. Yeah.
It was very
kudos to you, sir.
It was very punny.
Yes, it was.
Hashtag dad joke, Beatle joke. But hey, if it gets you to stay a little bit longer, then we are going to continue to do those clever openings. Since you're here, if you're new, welcome. There's a lot of stuff for you to check out. There is well over 150 episodes of other stuff. So there's bound to be something else in there. It's kind of like looking through like going into the attic and looking through like a chest that you haven't looked at through in a while. And you're familiar with what's there, but then you're surprised when you see it. And that's what our back catalog is there's a lot of stuff back there for you to, it's kind of like in the back room. It's like, go in the back room and pick something out, you know?
Yeah.
Go do that.
I have to say, it's a little daunting to see some of that stuff on YouTube. Some of the older episodes is popping up, which is, but it's good. We got some good stuff though. I'm very proud of some of the work we've,
I'm proud of everything.
Some of the statements we've made, some of them are better than others, but hey, we keep plugging along. We keep trying.
I stand by every statement that I've ever made. I will die on this hill. I will die on this podcast hill. But in order to find out what Eric's talking about, you're going to have to go and dig out some of those episodes. So if you're listening to us on whatever podcast provider you use, go ahead and follow us. This way you'll get a notification when new episodes come out. If you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and give us a like, give us a subscribe. That helps in the algorithm. That helps push us up in the search results so more people can find us. Either way, pull up a chair because we're going to be talking about a great album. Eric, it's been over a year. Usually we've done one Beatles per year, but we did not do any Beatles last year. I looked back. We did Rubber Soul in 2022. That's
incredible.
Yeah. So we had a dry spell. We had a Beatleless year last year. We did not do a Beatles album. So when Eric sent his list and Abbey Road was on, I'm like, well, we're overdue. So let's,
I was thinking about it today and I'm like, it's been just a few months, but you're right. Now that I think about it, damn, it flew by, didn't it?
It was like May of 2022. So,
okay.
Unlike our Abbey Road episode, we've got a guest helping us out on this one. Last scene, I believe, we were just taking pyromania and tearing it to shreds. And we were destroying Mutt Lang with Mr. Robert Prisament at the helm. So Rob, welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
Happy New Year. Glad to have you back. We had to let him get over the carnage that we caused of ripping a producer apart, but still loving an album.
Woo. It was
and now he's back.
Brutal.
Looking forward to it. Let's cross this road together.
Yes, we're gonna hold hands, or we're gonna dress up and kind of take an awkward pose to make it look like we're walking. Anyway, let's get into it. Rob, welcome aboard. It's great to have you on again. So
thank you.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to talking about this album. So let's get started. As we do, we give you some factual information. We give you some stats to start you off. And this way, hopefully some of those nuggets stay with you and you can kind of call them up if you ever want to, do some trivia or just kind of give some fun things. Anyway, this was released in September of 1969. It was produced by George Martin, hit number 1 on Billboard, and went 12 times platinum. There's not much else to say about this. The Beatles were an interesting group. There was one single released, but the Beatles were kind of a different animal, and the 60s were kind of a different time, where the Beatles were an albums band and a singles band, right, Robert? They would release singles that would not appear on albums. Like that was the singles were a separate thing.
Hey Jude was never on an official album.
Exactly, unless it was on a compilation. But so a lot of Beatles' big hit singles, what we consider like their big hits, were never on albums. They were released as singles. Lady Madonna, Hey Jude, whole bunch of songs that just were out. They would just kind of put them out, and then they would put out an album proper, and that would be a whole other set of songs, which is kind of nice.
And for some reason that I never really understood, the English releases and the U.S. releases were always totally different. Track listings, song setups, singles released. I'm like, aren't we all on the same page with this? Or do they know that we don't?
What they weren't on the same page because in the UK on the Parlophone label, those albums would come out. So let's use Rubber Soul. So Rubber Soul would come out and it would have, I don't know, 12 songs on it. When it came to America, they would they would take 4 of those songs and just remove them from the album, release Rubber Soul with 8 songs, and then put on another album called The Beatles 4 or The Beatles Again or whatever. And it would be cobbled together with whatever singles came out and then whatever was left over. And the United States would put out these compilation albums that didn't really exist, but stateside they existed. So like Yesterday and Today, that's not a Beatles album, right? That's an American release compiled from stuff from Revolver or whatever albums were out at the time.
And I remember when the entire catalog proper was released on CD in the late 80s. And then I think they tried to release the US versions. And I remember the packaging was a little bit bigger, it was taller, and it just didn't fly. It just, they were such a success in their, in the way they were officially intended to be, that nobody was buying the American versions at that point. It was just, that was a waste.
And I don't think the average consumer, especially since it's been so long and you have a lot of newer Beatles fans, comprehend the difference between the English and the US releases. And they're like, why are there 2 different versions of what I thought was the same album?
The good news is on streaming, it's the UK releases. So they did away with all those extra weird, confusing compilations that would come out. It was just like, let's get more Beatle product out. So as prolific as the Beatles were, the United States would just cram more stuff onto an album and package it with another title and put it out. Which is kind of interesting, so they didn't really oversaturate the market because all the stuff was available. It's just, they were repackaging it in different ways to sell more units. So that's why they could put the singles on an album and have them be part of an album with other tracks and push it out the door.
Now that being said, were the blue and the red albums, were they British? Were they Parlophone? Yeah, those were proper like greatest hits, like sort of best of compilation.
Yeah. Okay. On Apple. Yeah, those were official releases. But like like to Robert's point, the Hey Jude album. There's a Hey Jude album.
Yeah.
It's got like Old Brown Shoe on it. It's got all these great stuff on it, but that stuff, it doesn't really exist in the Beatles discography. So. But what we've got is plenty. Like I said, the Beatles were very prolific. So let's get everything started. I want to start with, before we get to Abbey Road. And I never really thought about this. So you guys give me your opinion about this. I'm going to make a statement and then you can kind of tell me what you think about this.
Okay.
I wrote down that before Abbey Road came out, the Beatles were essentially a mess. And let me make my point, okay? After Sgt. Pepper, here's what came out officially after Sgt. Pepper, right? Sgt. Pepper comes out, groundbreaking album, sets the standard. After that, the Magical Mystery Tour album came out. The Beatles, the White Album came out, and Yellow Submarine came out. And then the aborted and abandoned Get Back project. So I'm going to make the case that they hadn't really done much of substance since Sgt. Pepper.
Yeah.
Right? Magical Mystery Tour is like a compilation. It's kind of thrown,
a lot of
compilation. Yellow Submarine is half an album because it's music and then half is score. And then the Beatles is essentially 4 artists kind of doing their own thing and really not talking to each other or working with each other and kind of getting through things. And it's,
Mm-hmm.
very,
Sure.
Right, Rob? The White Album could be like the dirtiest Beatles album, meaning it's very loosey-goosey.
It's them all bringing individual songs into the band setting, and although they did that with all the albums, it's more obvious on the White Album.
Yeah.
That they're all working it seems like they're working in a compartmentalized fashion. So after when I think about this, when I was listening to this album and thinking about it, I'm like, God, what makes this album so great is how much of a mess they were beforehand, Eric. Do you get what I'm saying? Like,
no, I get it.
Even the Beatles' messy, garbagey stuff is better than most stuff that was in the 60s. But relative to the Beatles, it was the past few years after Pepper were a mess.
Well, they grew exponentially as songwriters. Even George Harrison at this point was a formidable presence. Now he was bringing songs in, and even George Martin was like, yeah, I mean, he's starting to get the goods. Paul, very prolific at this point. I mean, and I think to your point, Dean, I think it's the Get Back documentary that made me, when we were watching, we were commenting on how Paul was just coming up with these songs right on the fly. It's no surprise that most of the songs on Abbey Road are Paul. He dominates this album vocally. Typically I'd like to think that whoever sings the lead on the song is the principal songwriter.
Usually.
I think that's usually the case, with the exception of Ringo, of course. But yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I mean, there wasn't anything sort of cohesive as a band up until this point. But it was such, that's why people comment on how great the album is, because they actually, despite all of their bile and everything that was supposedly going on, they came together to just cut this album, and it was released before Let It Be. Let It Be was supposed to be before Abbey Road, right? I mean, it was never. Well, I mean, it wasn't that the thing.
That was the order of recording.
Well, yeah, whatever Get Back was going to be was abandoned. So they had left all that stuff in the dust. The movie it came out as a movie, but anything that was going to become an album was a shambles. So let's talk about that. I wrote it in my notes, and I'll throw it to Rob. Mm-hmm. And this might be blasphemous. I might get some shit for saying this, but does Let It Be really count? Does it really count as a Beatles album only because it came out after the Beatles had broken up, B, they had nothing to do with it, C, Phil Spector came in and put strings up, they just handed it to him, and D, it's not completed stuff. Like they were just working through stuff and trying to work up songs and then just kind of left it. So I know it's an official Beatles release, but I never look at that. I Let It Be as the last Beatles album. I look at this as the last statement that the Beatles made.
I do consider Let It Be. It's got enough solid completed songs on it to give it its own release. Let It Be, Across the Universe, Long and Winding Road.
Sure.
Those are full songs that can stand on their own. So I definitely consider, even if the other stuff is filler, it definitely has enough to. Yeah, oh no, I mean,
Get Back is definitely, these are classic songs. But when I'm looking at, when I look at the discography, I tend to keep Let It Be in a separate bin, only because it came out. It was an afterthought. It wasn't something. The Beatles had not thought that this stuff was good enough to release. Right. And they had walked away from that project and they moved on to this. Right. And so then they break up, and then this album comes out afterwards with, and Paul McCartney wasn't happy that what Phil Spector did to the Long and Winding Road.
No.
So it's kind of like, I always
that's why Capitol released it without the Phil Spector.
Yeah. Let It Be naked.
Yeah.
Which I like that. Which I like a lot. Yeah. I like that a lot. The stripped down. Yeah, I mean, I think even like you said, I mean, even at supposedly their worst, I mean, it was still great stuff. I mean, I've Got a Feeling, and I mean, they're just really great songs. I mean, Two of Us is a great track. Um, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think I see your point. I see the fact that it might have been an afterthought, but it was a great afterthought. It was a great little sort of epilogue, I suppose you could call it. But yeah, I consider it an official release.
Yeah, I mean, I do. I'm just like, in my mind, it's just like it shouldn't have been the last thing.
Yeah,
like this Abbey Road should have been the official, like, final statement, because that it has that feeling to it. You know, it's kind of like you said, they had come together. You know, after the Get Back sessions, George Martin was quite surprised when Paul McCartney approached him about, hey, you know, well, you know, you want to do another album, and George Martin thought, "Are you kidding? Like, I thought,
why?
I thought we were done.
You guys are a mess."
Yeah, I thought this was over, and George Martin said, "I will do it under one condition." He goes, "You let me produce it like we used to, with none of the fooling around, none of this stuff. We come in and we do the work." And they all said, "Let's do it." John Lennon's original idea, to Eric's point. He initially wanted one side to be just his music, and then he wanted Paul to have another side of music. So they were still that kind of rift there, the boundaries. But I think what we got was great. And these guys didn't know, just to put it into perspective too, they didn't know that they were working on their final album. You know, that things were tough and they had their riffs and they had their fights, but they went into this, you know, saying, like, we're going to make another album. Not we're going to make another album, we're going to break up. It was, we're going to make another album, but then things just happened. Things deteriorated further. John Lennon goes and releases a solo single, and then they just kind of, like, it just kind of falls apart. You know,
I think, like, a relationship, you know, it's so close to ending, or on such a rocky road that, you know, this is going to be the last time we're together like this.
Yeah, they were kind of limping along, but an album this good as a last album from a group that's breaking up, usually you don't get this. When groups are on the verge of breaking up, it usually shows, like, oh my God, this was just, it was a mess. They couldn't keep it together. The bickering, you know, this guy's not doing it. An album like this is almost like a comeback. I was thinking about it today also. I was like, this is almost like U2's Achtung Baby, right? U2 was on the verge of breaking up. They didn't know what they wanted to do. They rallied together and they put out something magnificent that sustained them for the rest of their career. An album this good should have, it seems like, would have invigorated them, right? Because it's just like, the stuff that's in here is magnificent, but they were okay with, we'll see ourselves out. You know, it's, you know,
what we perceive to be magnificent, maybe they just didn't. And I mean, whatever the chemistry, the magic was, like you say, if George Martin was indeed at the helm, in his production, I mean, it's certainly the best sounding Beatles album and still holds true today. I think it always sounded great. It was because it's full and rich and stereo, and it's just, you know, so yeah, I mean, but I think about the ratio of songs, though. Like I said, like Paul having, you know, the majority of the record. I just wonder how many songs did John Lennon want to put on this thing versus
he's got 5. He's got 5 that I'm counting just off the top of my. Because
it seems very, very, very Paul heavy. I was kind of listening today, and I'm just kind of like, wow, McCartney. And if you're a Paul McCartney fan, of course this is the album.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, but like, I like to think that there are the strongest songs for me are the ones that, you know, like, there's actually, I mean, we'll get to it later, but there's 4 songs that for me that define this album, and we'll mention that as we go. But yeah, you know, it is a strong end, a brilliant end to a legacy era. You know, like, it just I mean, it's, you know, it's undisputed.
And when you were saying how great it sounds, this was the first album to only be released in stereo. There was not a mono version.
Yeah.
And they had upgraded their equipment. They were working on 8-track recorders, upgraded. They had new consoles, new mixing consoles. So they were stepping into, you know, kind of what would be the sound of the 70s, and that just a really great, beautiful, lush, sound that they were achieving because of also the technology as well. So the technology upgrades, they really benefited from
what
it on
a
this
shame.
album. You really hear it.
And what a shame what might have been had they carried on. You know what I mean? With the stuff that they could have done is just, but we got ring the bell, but so we got somebody to carry the legacy forward.
Well, a lot of people, right? There was a lot of Beatles acolytes, right, Rob? I mean, you could, especially in the early '60s, every group that was coming out was, the Hollies and the Herman's Hermits, and all these guys were just kind of all just acolytes of the Beatles trying to cash in on that sound. But then eventually, just the Beatles just kind of separated because they were changing and evolving so quickly that bands couldn't. How do you?
Some of the earlier solo songs sound like, with a little massaging, they could have been a Beatles song.
Oh yeah, especially McCartney.
Oh yeah,
yeah. I hear a lot of what he would do in his future solo work in this stuff, like on "Oh Darling," and just the majesty of "Carry That Weight" kind of carries into "Live and Let Die" a little bit. That orchestration.
You're right.
That's right. Kind of carries forward. And one reviewer at the time I read saying or looking back saying that McCartney was still trying to recapture that. He was trying to, throughout his solo career, trying to recapture that Beatles, not the Beatles sound, but but what the Beatles were trying to attain. He was always kind of chasing that. And to great effect. I think he did, he sounds the most consistent coming out of this album, I think. I think the star of this album, it's not Ringo. I think George Harrison, Rob, comes out
Definitely.
looking the best. What do you think? Like his two songs are two for the ages, two that are probably the biggest ones off of this album, and the two that are finally show George Harrison like he came to the dance like the last album. He finally kind of really ascended to the heights of Lennon and McCartney we've talked about it in the past, but he
in his songwriting ability, not really his playing or talent, but just his songwriting ability. Like he spent the past 6 years, watching them and how they're doing it.
Yeah.
And brought to the table two of the best Beatles songs ever.
But they're magnificent, and they're just different enough. They're just so, not Lennon and McCartney. The chord changes and the odd, the slide, front and left. He never really played that slide guitar with the Beatles. This was like that guitar was just starting to go there, and then a year later, All Things Must Pass. That's when he had the bottleneck in his hand, and he was starting to play that, But something is just
something.
Well, yeah. I was going to say that, but I was like, no, I won't go there.
It's just.
I'd love to hear something.
Magnificent. It's absolutely magnificent. It's just.
I'd love to hear a demo of something, because when you go back and listen to it, McCartney's walking bass line is such an important part of that song that it just wouldn't be the same without it.
There is a super deluxe edition available on Spotify, the 2019 Giles Martin. Mix, and there is a demo version of something. It's bare bones.
Well, even the remix of the song, the bass is beefed up. You could definitely, there's a lot more happening. I love that remix. Actually, there's some of that stuff is really nice. Yeah. So
and something would be one of their most covered songs. Yesterday, I think, is the most covered Beatles song, and I think something might be second place. Frank Sinatra famously said, well, let's see if you could spot the error here, though. Frank Sinatra said, "This is my favorite of all the Lennon and McCartney songs for me to sing."
And there you go.
Frank.
Oh, Frank.
The chairman of the board.
Which I'm sure George Harrison probably got a good laugh out of that. I can imagine that he just his sense of humor, just be like, even Elvis did a cover of it on his Aloha from Hawaii special. Elvis Presley did a beautiful version of something. So it's one of those songs for he really hit one for the ages. He really hit it out of the park between that and Here Comes the Sun. I mean, those are two songs that really anchor each side, because they're both,
Something is the second song on the first side, and Here Comes the Sun is the first song on the second side. So they're kind of album openers and side openers.
Yeah.
And yeah, he just sounds comfortable. It doesn't sound like these were forced songs.
Mm-mm.
It just sounds like these just rolled off, and that's the beauty of these. They're just so easy to listen to. His vocal on it is beautiful. It sounds like he's singing from the heart. And he was just ready. Like he was just ready. And yeah, he would burst out of the gates with a triple album after this. He just like unlocked the floodgates and it all came out. But these two songs were the precursor to it.
Mm-hmm.
We can't give it like George Harrison doesn't get enough credit. And on this album, he needs to get a lot of the credit for really stepping up to it, right? There is not even Octopus's Garden. You can make fun of Ringo all you want, but that levity, is needed. Like right between Oh Darling and I Want You, She's So Heavy, which is a heavy song. Putting Octopus's Garden right in there and Ringo with his deadpan vocal delivery, like Yellow Submarine, like it works. Like it just works. And he wrote that song actually. He actually did. So all Beatles got a songwriting credit on this as well. And
to me, I kind of peg it as the Sloop John B of the Beatles. Like that's
sure.
You just you're squeaking that in there. Does it really fit with the rest of the theme of the album? Like like the Pet Sounds like, but
Palate
it doesn't
cleanser.
matter.
It would also fit good on a Wiggles album or
yeah. Well, yeah.
It probably has been since then. I'm
or
sure.
Rafi or something like that.
But the Beatles are known for that too. They always do they can do the quirky stuff
quirky.
like Old Blood D, Old Blood Da, and
Rocky Raccoon,
Rocky Raccoon. So it's not out of place that there's something quirky. Exactly, that there's something.
Well, Maxwell's Silver Hammer. I mean,
there's another one.
That's another one. Yeah, with Paul with that old timey wimey vocal that he does. He does that in several songs. Like it's old time radio voice.
Yep.
I like to think of it. I don't know how he does that. He just changes his voice to a certain degree, and they just get it just right to make it sound like an old time. Like radio voice, it's amazing stuff.
Yeah, and
the other three wanted nothing to do with that.
Yeah, especially John Lennon. They
he hated it. Yeah,
Paul was being such a perfectionist, and John Lennon. This is what John Lennon famously refers to as Paul's granny music. He calls this like When I'm 64, and this kind of sentimental stuff. He's like, oh, that's Paul's granny stuff. I didn't want nothing to do with it. He actually left for a while and then came back in time to do some overdubs. But Paul, and that, I think that's where the split comes too, Rob. You made a good point, is George Harrison rose to the occasion.
He was the dark horse in the band.
Yeah, but
Exactly.
I got it. Ringo's Ringo. Ringo's is there to support, but Paul's like powers. Paul was like powering up like in an exponential way. Like he was just he was surpassing just writing songs and getting into like really production, creating, arranging songs. Now that could be annoying to other people that are not in that headspace, right, Rob? Like he seemed to be really be powering up in a direction that, Lennon was going for a more raw sound. George Harrison would have been happy just to start experimenting and recording, and McCartney was becoming a song craftsman, which is different. And that could be annoying to people, right, Rob? I mean, I think
probably had a lot more to say when it came to the different parts, and the other guys were probably just humoring him and saying whatever you'd like. Paul will just do that to move on to the next song.
Kind of like in Get Back when Harrison says to McCartney, like, I'll play if you want me to play, I won't play if you don't want me to play. He's like, whatever will please you, I'll do.
But he's just, the thing of it was he's just churning them out. And again, I think maybe, but to that point, I mean, you look at something like Something and you say that one song is better. I mean, for every 10 songs that Paul McCartney writes, Something is better than some of those songs that he could just churn out. So there is that sort of balance there in that way. Like, and John Lennon's the same way. I don't think he was as prolific in his output in terms of like at that point in time. I think he was, like you say, I think he was looking for a very particular sound. feelings and emotions were coming up, and he was getting very political. He's also very angry.
Mm-hmm.
And those early years of John Lennon, I mean, songs like Mother and, like stuff like that was just like, wow, why the fuck are you so angry?
Cold Turkey, a lot of that early stuff was,
right.
Post breakup we're talking about.
Yeah.
Speaking of Lennon and that kind of raw sound he was going for, the song "Oh Darling," he felt that he felt like that's something that I should be saying. Yeah, he's like, I think I should have been singing that song because it's not the granny music, and it's the vocal performance is more the way I do things. But that's the versatility of McCartney, is he can do the old timey stuff, but he can stretch his vocal. I love the shouting McCartney too. I
get in there and scream it.
Yeah. Because he's got good control with it, like with that, and Golden Slumbers to a lesser extent. Golden Slumbers is more of a singing vocal, but it's heavy throated. When it starts off very gentle, but then once it takes over, he's singing in a bigger voice, but not the "Oh Darling" voice. The "Oh Darling" voice is like the day after, like a party voice, and he's like all scratchy.
He would do that a lot in his solo work with Wings too. Like, I mean, I'm thinking of like you got stuff.
Maybe I'm amazed.
But like in Venus and Mars, you have "You Gave Me the Answer," which is that old timey "You Gave Me the Answer," and then he'll do something like Magneto and Titanium Man, where he has that that scratchy voice and he gets loud and he's like, I love that. Yeah, "Live and Let Die," same thing. It's just kind of like, range, just lots of range, and clearly, musically, I think the most. Probably the most talented, I would say. He had the most prowess in terms of his musicality.
So I got a question for you guys.
Yeah.
Talking on McCartney, he took some solos in the end.
Yeah, they all traded off.
The other two. Has he played lead guitar on any of the other Beatles stuff? Or is this his foray into...
I think he has. I think he has played guitar because George Harrison plays bass on Golden Slumbers. So they were all kind of switching. I'm pretty sure McCartney played guitar in some earlier stuff, maybe on Sgt. Pepper. It wasn't unheard of. But what you're talking about is the song "The End," which made my number one on our top 5 guitar solos episode. Go check it out. Free plug for our own show. They all took turns. I think it was McCartney first, George Harrison, then John Lennon. They each played 2 bars twice, and they went through. One of the engineers that was in the studio at the time said these guys looked like they couldn't have been happier. They were standing around in kind of in a triangle, in a circle, playing like they used to be playing and laughing and having a gas doing it. So, and I think that's what comes through on this album. I think that's the thing about Abbey Road. Is it feels cohesive. It doesn't feel splintered. It doesn't feel individual, like a double album's worth of just stuff. Like Flights of, White Album was like Flights of Fancy, whatever kind of came, whatever you wanted to do, Martha, My Dear, and, Honey Pie, and just whatever it was, like kind of, we're going to throw it out there. This has like intention to it, and especially when we get to side 2, let me throw a question out there. Side 2, best side 2 ever. One of the best, let me say one of the best side 2 ever in rock and roll. We'll start with Eric.
It's definitely, I mean, here you have for the first time, I think the Beatles ever did anything like this, where you had multiple changes within a song. "You Give Me Your Money" is one of the 4 songs that I was referring to. In that song alone, it's very proggy. It's like this could be the precursor to what a lot of the prog bands were doing in the fact that there's several different things happening in the song. It's like 4 completely different songs in one. It's like it keeps changing, and that was brilliant. So I think so. I think so. This might the first.
We did not plan any of this, but since you mentioned prog music, John Anderson of Yes said when he first heard side 2, and especially the medley at the end.
Yeah.
He goes, that's when I kind of got the idea that you can say different things within a song, like the Roots of Prague.
Right.
I'm not saying this is the Roots of Prague, because King Crimson's first album was out in '69. There was a lot of stuff going on, but the thought, it inspired John Anderson of Yes to be thinking that not thinking so laterally, but thinking, kind of expanding thoughts within a song and having different movements, as it were, especially within You Never Give Me Your Money, or the medley that just kind of rolls through everything.
Yeah.
You literally get like 5 songs at the end that are a minute, 2 minutes each, that kind of, it's almost like the Beatles are just kind of like rushing through and powering through to the end, and just kind of giving you like one after the other.
A lot of
side 2 was a direct inspiration for Billy Joel's Scenes from an Italian Restaurant.
Oh, where
I can see that. Wanted to do something like that, and he had a song called Brenda and Eddie. It was just the middle part of the song, and he was like, I've got this, but I need another, segment to it. It doesn't work. It's just starting out like that. And in the studio with Phil Ramone, they came up with, the intro and the outro whistling and all that. And now it's a staple of his.
Yeah, there's no doubt that a lot of Genesis music is the same way. Tony Banks said the same thing. I mean, he's famous for writing some of the bigger, more classical stuff like Supper's Ready and that kind of thing, with Gabriel writing the the lyrics. But all of those just segments of just one song became a grand opus. And you mentioned Yes, Close to the Edge is another. That's a whole side, 25 minutes long, one song, but four distinct parts. And it's just, broken up into themes. And that's, it started there. I think so. But because it's more, like King Crimson was just noise. They're known for just, whatever, and a lot of improv. But with this, it's like, it's a song. It's musical passages with lyrics and chord changes and proper, a proper composition, Mm-hmm. So you're talking of, so yeah, I definitely think the Beatles started that.
Let me ask you this, Eric. Mm-hmm. The songs on side 2 of Abbey Road, do you think you could pull them apart and they could stand on their own?
They might.
Do you think the end, Golden Slumbers,
they could,
Halloween Pam and stuff, like if you unstrung them together, would you come up with, 7 or 8 songs that are strong?
I think so. That is a very good question. Look at Day in the Life. That was 2 separate songs. But that middle part with McCartney coming in, it's a completely different thing. But it's part of that is part of the song, So it's like, yeah, I mean, I definitely think there's a lot of that going on there. And even the recurring, they do recur. You Never Give Me Your Money, that with the horns, right?
Back to carry that weight
and carry that weight. So it's almost like a medley within a medley, So it's absolutely brilliant. Yeah, that last, like, what was it, like 20 minutes of the album is just fantastic.
Yeah. Well, do we know if they recorded them all as different songs and George Martin strung them all together, or if they had it beforehand planned to be a medley?
I know that they had planned some different. I'm going to say no, only because Her Majesty, which is a hidden track, which is the very last thing, that was actually not supposed to be at the very end. That was supposed to come after, I think, Mean Mr. Mustard. And John Lennon had written and performed the last chord of Mean Mr. Mustard to complement her going into Her Majesty.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say that these were written as short form pieces with the intent of being part of a medley, that these are not cut. These were not recorded full songs that were cut down.
Boy,
I'm going to go with
following this theme. I'd love to hear when they were separate songs and they said, okay, let's string them together, how it sounded if they tried them in different orders.
Yeah.
Which they probably did. See if it works in this order, see if it works in that order, and how they came up with the running order that we know today and can't imagine any other way.
I'm definitely sure something. I'm sure somebody has had to have talked about this. It'd be an interesting piece of research to do. Like, we should, look into that. Check out, maybe we should rewatch the anthology or something. I don't know. Like go back to maybe there has to be some kind of mention of it. I mean,
I used to have a book of every. It was called the Beatles recording sessions, and it was a book of every recording session that they ever did.
Okay.
I don't have it anymore. When I got one of my first dogs, he basically chewed it up.
Oh,
it was like the one fucking book that you had to choose. You couldn't choose the book to the left or the right. You had
pieces of songs everywhere. Patch it all together.
It might have been in there.
You could have done that and remixed the album yourself, man. You could have just pasted the song, like the pages together. Oh, that works. That works.
Did he finish eating the book with Abbey Road or let it be?
No, he just chewed the whole side of it because it was on a low bookshelf and he was a puppy, so he was into chewing things. And I came home and it was just destroyed. We're talking about Beatles influencing other artists. I'm going to throw two songs out there that were actually the Beatles being influenced by other artists of the time. The first one is Because. Now, this might be, I'm going to go a little deep on this. This is going to be maybe for Eric. Tell me that Because wasn't inspired by Our Prayer by the Beach Boys from the Smile sessions.
I could totally see that. Yeah.
I cannot. Robert, have you ever heard that song, Our Prayer by the Beach Boys?
No, I haven't.
It's from the Abandoned Smile project. It's been released. It's just a vocal only Beach Boys going through vocal gymnastics in without any lyrics. Very much sounds like it very much sounds like they were, especially because the Beatles didn't usually waver between notes when they would sing together, and this has that in there, which the Beach Boys were really good at. And then just a side note with Because, that stuff at the end is not real. It's fake language. It's like some Spanish. It's made up words like the, Questro, obrigato, tanto. It's just word. Like it doesn't mean anything. They would just kind of make it.
Bracky.
Yeah, it was just shit. Yeah. Now,
Klingon.
Now, Sun King was the Beatles consciously trying to mimic Fleetwood Mac's song Albatross. George Harrison said in 1987, he goes, we had heard Albatross by Fleetwood Mac, which was an instrument.
Oh, yes.
It was one of their only hits before the well ran dry. And George Harrison's like, we were trying to kind of do an Albatross kind of thing on Sun King.
I could definitely see that.
Go back and listen to
I love Albatross. It's a brilliant Peter Green. Yeah.
Yeah. The beginning instrumental part of Sun King, not the vocal part, but the beginning with that lone guitar on the lower strings and
sort of baritone
and those strummed chords. Listen to Albatross by Fleetwood Mac. It's an instrumental that during their blues period, it was a minor hit for them. It was probably big in England. So George Harrison said, that we tried. We didn't really hit the nail on the head, but we were trying to do that. So they were taking in influences as well. As much as they were the taste makers and the trendsetters, they were not above kind of copying some other stuff and saying, "Oh, that kind of sounds neat. We can kind of."
Absolutely. I mean, Paul McCartney is a Brian Wilson acolyte too. I mean, he, there was that mutual respect going on there, but both of them just brilliant. Just the way they were able to compose music is outstanding.
The first line of "Come Together," actually, John Lennon stole from another song and got sued for, and it was a very interesting lawsuit.
I heard
Here Come Old Flat Top was not something he came up with on his own.
Was it just the lyric, or was it the?
It was just the lyric.
Okay.
Yeah, there's another song that the first line of that is "Here Come Old Flat Top," and you could not get away with that.
I'm going to say that sounds like an old that could be an old blues tune, maybe, or an old sort of R&B-ish type of thing.
Chuck Berry. Chuck Berry.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah. This is from Wikipedia. In 1969, "Come Together" was the subject of a copyright infringement claim brought against Lennon by Big Seven Music, the publisher of Chuck Berry's "You Can't Catch Me." Contended that it sounded similar musically to Berry's original and shared some lyrics. Lennon sang "Here Come Old Flat Top," he come grooving up slowly. Berry had sung Here come a flat top," he was moving up with me. Before the recording, Lennon and McCartney deliberately slowed the song down and added heavy bass riff to make it more sound original. Settled out of court in 1973, so he paid. He paid.
Okay, but but that could have been. Well, you got to do what you got to do. But on the other hand, it's John Lennon honoring. It's not the first time they covered Chuck Berry.
Yeah.
So that could be intentional. Like, I'm gonna change the wording a little bit. But Chuck Berry might have been in his mind the entire time.
Yeah.
I
guess
because what the hell's that song really about anyway? Because the whole thing is like nonsensical.
Well, and there's the difference, and there's the difference in this album, right? And that's a great kind of extra point we're going to jump off of. John Lennon was still into that word imagery kind of stuff, like free association or word association in his lyrics, and McCartney was kind of writing just more like stylized stories and songs that kind of were a complete thing. And Lennon would continue that trajectory. He kind of still, kind of stayed on that path, and McCartney. So they were splitting, even though they complemented each other. Lennon, even as in one of his last interviews or interviews before he passed away, was still referring to that stuff as granny music from Paul McCartney. He hated the granny music. He couldn't, he always wants like the rough. He's a rock and roller at heart, Yeah. And it shows here. When I was listening to this album too, it's very melancholy because it's like it's the ending of an era. It's the end. Like, this is it. This was the Beatles' final statement to everybody, and it is, and that medley at the end is just so beautiful with, with Golden Slumbers and Carry That Weight, and when they're singing, the lyrics, carry that weight. Like, Ringo is a little more forward. You can kind of hear Ringo a little forward in the mix, and it's just so many different things, and it's just and then they break out into that instrumental break with Ringo's drum solo, and and then, like you said, then it calls back to "You Never Give Me Your Money." They have like the French horns and the orchestration calling back to it. And it's just done so beautifully. It's just put together so well that it sometimes when I listen to it, it kind of makes me sad, because it's like you hear it ending, and when you hear that last refrain of "You never give me your money," you know everything's kind of coming to an end, Well,
just imagine being a Beatles fan then.
Yeah.
And buying that album, the brand new Beatles album, thinking that they're going to continue, and then finding out maybe a year later that they broke up.
Not even.
Imagine what you're feeling then, listening, going back and I wonder if how many people actually did not listen to that record because of that,
Dean, I'd really like to see your point, because you're looking at it with hindsight.
Yes.
If you listen to Abbey Road just on its own, would it sound melancholy? Would you hear a band breaking up, or would you just say, damn, that's good?
I think a little bit of both, because I think it has that majestic sound that is a little just melancholy on its face. It has that sentimental sound to it, right? With the French horns and the crescendo, all that stuff is just kind of orchestral anyway, which kind of, I think, generates an emotional response in me anyway. So I think when you pile on the knowledge, like you're saying, pile on the knowledge that this was the end, and they didn't know it was the end, but it turned out to be. It does make it kind of bittersweet and a little melancholy. So yeah, there's definitely hindsight involved of knowing what we know now about it. At the time, some of the critics are like, Beatles didn't really break any new ground. They, some of the critics were like, okay, yeah, it's really good. I guess they were almost taking them for granted. Like, yeah, it's great as usual for the Beatles.
But they could have put out anything under. They could put out a 12-inch piece of cardboard under the name the Beatles, and it would have sold 4 million copies.
I think they did. I think it was called Yellow Submarine.
Yeah.
Which is, hey, Bulldog.
I totally agree. I think the music is, I wouldn't say that it's the Beatles at their peak. I think it's past the really? They're most creative in terms of like but there is a maturity to the music at this point. And it feels like they're ready to do either more of something or just, this could be it, but let's do it right. And you do get that. I definitely feel like that's the case in terms of the production, because like you say, it is the first album in stereo. And that's the most striking thing about it for me is how well it sounds. Even then, it sounded great.
Well, here's the thing. You said that this is not them at their creative peak. Let me put this forth.
Well, I don't necessarily mean creative peak, but I'm just saying, like, I think they've already done their more like sort of experimental, like breakthrough stuff. Like,
Okay.
like I don't agree. I don't agree with the critics, but I understand what they mean by, this is, like you said, that's just them doing more of great stuff. And but for me, it's like the songwriting is that much stronger, and like piecing this stuff together in terms of like medleys and things like that is something unlike they haven't done. They maybe started, there's like with Day in the Life and little, maybe some stuff on Sgt. Pepper, other things like that. But now it's like, it seems so to flow and so natural that they really matured into the craft. And it didn't feel like an effort. Like it really didn't feel like,
Let me put it to you. Let me put it this way then. Do they do we give the Beatles extra points on Abbey Road because of the mess that came beforehand? Right? It was easy starting with their progression, and they were just knocking out albums, and they were growing. And then, like I said, Sgt. Pepper was kind of like a stop, and they kind of meandered, almost broke up, but then had the fortitude to pull everything together as like tighter than tight, and then come out with something like this. Like, so does that, Rob, do you think that garners any extra points for you or no?
I don't think so.
No, really?
Not for me, because I'm just not looking at where they were in personal relationships. I'm just looking.
Well, even musical though. Even musical. I mean, but like I said, the stuff before this was kind of meandering and kind of like, it's like the White Album.
Yeah, but consider it could have been their version of like something like the White Album is sort of like, and they started to do, perhaps this was their way of doing like a solo record. They needed to break away from each other to get that stuff out of their system, to kind of see what can I do, individually, so that I could bring that to the table when we do get back together.
Absolutely.
I definitely feel like that's the case on Abbey Road. Yeah. So, I mean, and whether or not whoever made the decision to actually do this and to get back together and to say, hey, we need to make one final statement. I don't know who that was. Was it Paul? Was it John? I don't know. Maybe George Martin. I don't.
Well, it seems like it was Paul's idea first, because the story goes he approached George Martin and said, "Hey, we're ready. Let's give it another go around." John Lennon was first out the door, because even though this was their last recorded thing, the Beatles did gather, actually the three of them, because John Lennon was kind of out of it by then. Three Beatles came together to record "I Me Mine" to kind of polish that up in 1970. Just because they were kind of working on that to put it out as a single or as a B-side of a single. So it was just Paul, Ringo, and George. And by that point, John had gone. It wasn't official. He had secretly left. Like, it was kind of like he, just like everybody else, had quit except for Paul. George quit. Ringo quit for a couple of weeks during the White Album. So John had left. They in 1970 they got together. They did "I Me Mine," so it could be the B-side of something, and then that was it. Then. It just fit. It wasn't a big thing, right? It just fit. Like, the Beatles just kind of fizzled and just kind of said, okay, I think they may have had intentions on regrouping at some point, but then just never did. Like, it was kind of like REM, like REM kind of broke up, but they didn't say never. We're done. I
always heard too that Paul was always, very much in, he was anxious to get back on the stage too.
Yeah, he wanted to tour.
He wanted to tour. He wanted to perform. Nobody else was interested in that. So I think that had a lot to do with it. There was that excessive energy that he had to really become the rock star and to be, And I think he obviously did that with Wings. I mean, that really kind of those years, like up until 76, that they put out Wings Over America, and that was the last time they actually officially toured before we got to see them. Yeah, I mean, so
fed the ego, definitely fed the ego of him, And
I know he got a lot of heat for saying like being the one that actually, but I think he was the one that actually had to say, "Hey, we're done," because where was John Lennon? Like you pointed out, he just disappeared. So Paul was the one who had to officially say, "Look, we're done." So he got a lot of like, "Oh, but Paul McCartney broke the Beatles up." No, I don't think that was the case. I think he very much wanted to continue, but he was up here, whereas the other guys were just kind of like wanted to just do their thing in their own way. And at this point, that's just the way it goes.
I think though, taking a 10,000-foot view, if you take all the Beatles songs individually, just throw them in a pot, don't put them on any album. I think some of the songs from Abbey Road rise to the top and don't sound like old stuff.
No,
I mean, Here Comes the Sun still goes to the top. It doesn't. You don't say it's early, late, or close to breaking up.
No, absolutely.
And that's why they've stand at the test of time, not because they were, leftover songs or old songs, but because they are great in the Beatles catalog, and that's all that really matters.
Yeah, but but also because they put their full creative powers behind them. Right? They weren't half-assing anything. This was kind of like George Martin, kind of laid the gauntlet down. He goes, "I'm going to do this, but we got to record. We got to work like we used to work. And here's the expectation: is you come in, and none of this other stuff that went on with Get Back, where it's like it looked like a hangout, it looked like a club.
But Yoko was still there.
she was, and that was she was. I don't believe that she was an issue with everything. It was kind of even if you watch the Get Back thing, he's interacting with her, and there's not like this big thing. I think it was kind of played up in the press to vilify somebody. But these guys had started to splinter, like we had said, it started to splinter.
She was just there. She was hanging out. I mean, Paul brought Linda.
Yeah, she was there.
Linda was there. Ringo, whoever he was seeing at the time, I'm sure she was there as well. George had Patty, Patty Boyd, and they would come and go and interact and so
they're all hanging there. So
yeah.
All right, Eric, you as we wind down, you said there were 4 songs on this album. This is your opportunity. Lay the 4 songs on us from this album that.
Well,
the ones that you said or exemplify this for you.
I think it's Come Together. I think it's Something. I think it's You Gave Me Your Money and Because. Nice. Because to me is nice because it's all of them harmonizing together, and I liked the idea of picking one song that each of them sang. Sans Ringo, of course. I'm sorry, Ringo, but he doesn't make that.
Not for nothing, Eric. You picked 4 songs, and you could have picked Octopus's Garden, and each one still could have gotten one.
Yeah, that's true.
So
that's true. No, but I'm just saying. But that unfortunately didn't rise to the.
It did him dirty. That's all there is.
I did him dirty. I'm sorry, Ringo. But he's got that great drum fill.
Yes.
So there it is.
I saw this great cartoon of them in the studio, and Ringo comes in and says, "Guys, I wrote a new song. And the other 3 are like, "Very nice, Ringo. We're going to put it here on the refrigerator for everybody to see."
Kind of like a kid's finger painting, right?
Exactly.
Wow.
Rob, what's a couple of highlights for you on this?
Definitely Come Together. For some reason, when I was younger, I remember when I was 10 or 11, my brother gave me this album, and I wore it out. And at that age, Maxwell Silverhammer was just a funny song.
Yeah.
I don't know if it stands up at my current age, but back then it was a go-to song. And Something was the very first song I ever played on drums when I was learning drums.
There you go.
So that holds a special place for me. Definitely Here Comes the Sun is just heads and tails above just about anything else. Golden Slumbers and In the End I love. And there have been some really great covers of so many of the songs on this album. That could be a whole episode.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go with something. I'm a McCartney homer, so it's kind of gonna be like "Oh Darling," and then I'm gonna cheat and just take the whole medley at the end as one.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's like one complete thought, and it's just, and like you said, the songs are so different.
Yeah.
And they some end so abruptly, and then the next song starts. Even like she came in through the bathroom window. Like there's all this great, there's so much great stuff in there. And then you get to Golden Slumbers, and it's just like a lonely piano, you know, and McCartney singing, and then these lush strings, a 30-piece orchestra comes in. You know, once there was a way to get back home, you know, and it's just so like,
if there was ever a song that reminds me of ELO, it's that song. Without a doubt. I mean, just the way the orchestration of it, the way the strings come in, and it's just so lush. And that's the one Beatles song that I always say that sounds like ELO rather than than sounding like the Beatles. Yeah.
Is that possible? Is that in a weird world? It is possible. But so, and that whole, and that you carry that weight, like some reviewers or critics have speculated that carry that weight actually means like we're going to carry the weight of being Beatles for the rest of our lives. Like we're going to have to carry this. This is something we're going to have with us forever. And much to George Harrison's chagrin, right? He hated, like for a while he was despised. He used to be really, really mean in interviews when it would be about the Beatles, and he just didn't want anything to do with that in the late 70s, early 80s. And then he finally embraced it. But this whole package, like I said, is just it's a masterpiece. It really is.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Bookend this with and I'm a big fan of their first album. So you could put on their first album and put this album on and see where they went in less than 10 years. Is nothing short of amazing. Yeah, in 1962 actually 7 years, 1962 to 1969. Listen to the Beatles' first album of the raw energy.
Mm-hmm.
Recording songs in one day, sometimes in less than a day, and pulling it all together, and how much they learned and grew in 7 years to put out a piece of music like this is nothing short of incredible. And that
is just an amazing thing that four musicians did, because I've gone back recently and started listening to some Cavern Club recordings, and I don't hear magic there. I hear a Skipple type cover band.
Yeah, a working band.
I don't blame Decca for turning them down. I just hear, good cover band. I don't hear Sgt. Pepper in that.
Yeah, they were at the time. They were one of hundreds there, and there were ones that were much more popular. They cut their teeth by just playing though every night in Germany and in England.
They played like 1,000 shows before their first album.
Yeah, 3 and 4 sets a night in Germany, and just honing and just getting good at being musicians. And then they got their opportunity, and they made the most of it. They changed music, they changed culture, they changed, much like Elvis and Frank Sinatra before.
Just give me the ball.
Changed culture forever and changed the way people thought about music. And this was, absolutely one of the well springs. So this
is definitely your favorite album by the Beatles. Would you say that?
It's tough. I honestly, I'm going to be honest. I gravitate towards the first album. I really love their debut because it was so raw. It was so like these guys didn't know, like they weren't the Beatles yet. They were the Beatles in name, but they didn't have any popularity. So this is what they were. They didn't have to worry about what people thought, who they were inspiring. They were in the studio and they got to do a song a day. And it was and there was a lot of covers. They did a lot of covers early on, but it's there. I saw her standing there, and I love Please Please Me. I love that fucking song. Like there's just so much great stuff and that's it right there. That's the root. That's the seed right there. And everything else came from that album. So
that's great.
I'm always going to have a soft spot for Please Please Me, their first album, just because it's so raw. And they just kind of went there and did it. And who knew? This could have been one of, like Rob said,
True.
this is one of 1,000 bands and one of like and George Martin was a comedy producer. He produced classical records. There was no rock producers. They assigned this guy to the Beatles. Like, yeah, work with these kids.
Mm-hmm.
None of this should have worked, right? Like they were kind of like, yeah, we'll sign you and we'll assign you to George Martin. He does comedy records, and so he doesn't know anything about rock and roll, but they needed a mentor, and he was the mentor to facilitate their wild ideas as they grew into this thing. So it's really amazing.
That's great.
So is Brian Epstein the person that we owe this all to? Seeing something special in them?
Absolutely. Right. Mm-hmm. He saw them and he wasn't a music promoter, but he said, I'm going to become one. I'm going to promote these guys. I think there's something there. We're going to clean them up. We're going to get them in matching suits. We're going to get them to wash, they had that real greaser look, right? Rob,
leather jackets and
slick back hair, leather jackets, the denim pants with the cuffed, the cuffs on the bottom. Clean those guys right up. Haircuts, suits, matching suits. You're going to look like proper gentlemen. And it worked. It's weird things. A producer that wasn't a producer, a manager that wasn't a manager.
Yep.
And somehow it worked. And
they were rockers and they became mods.
Yeah. And as Ringo says in Hard Day's Night, I'm a mocker.
Yeah, there you go.
Yes.
And she said, there's one interview. She goes, "Are you a mod or a rocker?" And he's like, "I'm a mocker."
Oh, that's a great film too.
Yeah,
I mean, that's probably that movie. Oh my God, I could watch that.
Chock full of that dry British humor. Extremely.
Oh my God, the old man in that is absolutely brilliant. Look at him reading his book. He just kills me every time. And then did we see that in the theater? Like, Dean, did we see that movie in the theater?
I might have.
We might have.
Yeah, he's very clean.
We didn't even get into maybe a whole other episode just on the album cover.
You know what? I wrote something about let's talk quickly about the album cover. I did write it in my notes. The album cover is a story in its own for a couple of reasons. A few years before 1969, somewhere around Sgt. Pepper, maybe around Revolver, Paul McCartney got into a moped accident, and he chipped his tooth. If you look at the music video they did for Rain, you can see his tooth is chipped and he got a scar on his lip. At that point, people said, "Well, that's not Paul McCartney. That's an imposter. Real Paul McCartney died in a car crash. This is not Paul McCartney."
Mm-hmm.
So the Abbey Road cover, and if you look at the Magical Mystery Tour album cover, you turn it upside down, it looks like the Beatles, the word Beatles looks like a phone number that you could call and they would give you information about Paul McCartney, the death. I am the walrus, the walrus signifies death and Paul was the war, all this kind of crazy stuff.
Sgt. Pepper has his base in the flowers, that's another clue.
Exactly.
Something about Abbey Road. There's some clues on that album.
Well, there is. There's in the back of Abbey Road. There's a Volkswagen parked on the side of the road.
Yeah,
and the license plate number is 28 if, which means that Paul McCartney would have been 28 if he was still alive. Had he still been alive, he would have been 28 at the time of that. It was 28 if. And then the way everybody's dressed, John Lennon's all in white, right? And he's like the preacher. George Harrison is wearing like a gravedigger's. He's wearing
the gravedigger. Yep.
Paul McCartney is barefoot. They said they used to bury people barefooted, and he's the only one who's not in the same stride as the other three. His stride is off. He's walking with a different foot leading. All this crazy stuff, right, Rob? Is that did I cover it all?
That's a good part of it.
In a nutshell.
And Strawberry Fields has "You Can Hear Paul Is Dead" over and over. And funny thing about Abbey Road is after it became so popular, somebody found the Volkswagen somewhere and stole the license plates off of it.
Really? That's become a popular tourist destination, that intersection where people will run out. They'll run out there. They'll set up the shot, take the picture really quick, and replicate the album cover. It's one of the most visited places that an album cover.
To take it a step further, there is a YouTube channel with a live stream of that intersection, so you can just watch people all day long.
Really?
Recreate the picture.
You know what? I'm going to find that channel. We're going to put it in the show notes.
There you go.
You just put it on live stream on your channel.
Just the Abbey Road channel, courtesy of restreaming, courtesy of the 3324 podcast. Any final thoughts, Rob, about Abbey Road?
I give it a thumbs up.
Thumbs up.
I give it one or two 5 stars. I would recommend.
Cool. Eric, anything in closing?
Oh, it's timeless.
It is.
It's a brilliant end to a brilliant band.
If Paul McCartney was alive, he would agree.
Yeah. I don't know who this replicant is walking around like.
But it's pretty good. Pretty damn good.
Showing up at the Taylor Swift's party at the Super Bowl. He's like shaking hands with Taylor Swift, and like, why is Paul McCartney like? It's weird. Like he's just there in all these functions. Like he just shows up.
He's like Forrest Gump. He just shows up. Oh yeah, that's going to do it for this episode of the 3324 podcast. Go check out Abbey Road. It's available on streaming services. There is what's called a super deluxe edition, which has the Giles Martin, who is George Martin's son, remastered. There's a whole extra couple of discs worth of demos and sessions and all that kind of stuff, so you can kind of listen to how it was put together and what the songs were in their working forms. But just listen to the album and you're fine. Like I always advocate for, listen to what they put on vinyl, and you're going to take a trip. Like I said, the closing statement from the Beatles, and it's good to see that they went out like this and it didn't go out in shambles. Like some artists put out an album and it's crappy, and then they just break up afterwards. The Beatles really kind of gathered their forces together,
maintained their legacy.
Yeah, worked as a band one more time and really aced it. I mean, this was not a half-hearted or half-assed effort. It stands, far and wide and tall in their legacy and their discography. So, Rob Prisament, thank you very much, sir, for joining us.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
2024.
Always.
We appreciate it. We'll look forward to seeing you on many more episodes. So, if you've made it this far in the YouTube world, go ahead and like and subscribe if you haven't done that yet. If you're listening to us on your favorite podcast provider, go ahead and hit that follow button. You'll get a notification when new episodes come out, and we'll be sitting in these chairs hot and ready waiting for you to give you more great music and movie podcasting the way that only the three of us, Rob, you now we have put the definitive stamp on this, right? Per your email. Rob's like, well, what more could be said about Abbey Road? And I'm like, we haven't said anything about Abbey Road yet. That's why.
Now the final word is in.
That's it. Now there shall be no more podcast episodes about Abbey Road heretofore going forward.
I guess the real question is, are there going to be any more Beatles?
Absolutely. From us, yeah. Well, we'll probably get through the whole discography. Absolutely. There's no reason not to. We will probably go through the whole discography. It's evergreen stuff, and it's great stuff to each one is so different that it's not like you're retreading anything. You can kind of go and do each one, and there's a different spin and a different point of view. So that's what's great about music, and that's what's great about us talking about it, is we bring our points of views and our different things, and sometimes we change our mind, sometimes we don't, sometimes we stand on something even firmer, and I love having these discussions. That's what's great about it, right? Is we kind of bring our points of view, and we kind of throw them in the middle, and they tussle around a little bit, and we see what comes out of it, and it's always fun. And we hope that you as the listener have enjoyed it, because we certainly had a blast, and we look forward to doing it again real soon. So, for Mr. Robert Prisament, for Mr. Eric Cooper, this has been me, Mr. Dean Legiro, asking you to please flip it over, because the medley is on side 2.
You've been listening to the 3324 podcast with Dean Legiro and Eric Cooper. You can find us on your favorite podcast provider, so please like, subscribe, and rate to become a part of the 3324 family. Your feedback is important, so make sure to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at 3324 podcast and on Twitter at 3324p to join the conversation.